But thank you very much for inviting me. And it's quite interesting. I'm standing in, so the scale or fail thing, I've certainly learnt something, that J curve. I'm going to study that and work out where we are on that. Are we on the downward trend? Are we at the bottom of the valley of death, or are we somewhere climbing? Hopefully we're kind of climbing out of the valley of death. But we're a young business. We've just had our third birthday open as a distillery, but I'll give you a bit of a background to us as a business. We have a slogan, the Dockyard Spirit Endures. We're based at Chatham Dockyard, and we think it's a nice pun on spirit. But really, like the other speakers earlier, we wanted to set something up that we were going to be proud of, that we enjoyed, something that was going to last a long time and something that was going to grow into the future. And we wanted to create scale with minimum investment. So we've tried to leverage everything that we can locally in order to do that. We haven't sought external investment at this point, but you never know. It's something that we can look at. To give you a bit of background, it's a family business. My father, myself and my brother set the business up, but we've been immersed in alcohol for as long as I can remember. I was born in '73, and shortly after, Dad decided to set up a wine bar, probably because he wouldn't go to the pub enough, having a young family. But ever since 1979, the family's grown up in the drinks industry. So it's something that we know an awful lot about, or we hope that we know an awful lot about. And as a family, we started to talk about establishing a spirits business or a drinks business way back in 2005. But we did a lot of planning, a lot of talking in order to set the right business up before we got there. So it gives you some sort of idea of the timeline. So this is the video, which, doesn't look like it's going to play. It's a video that I embedded this morning. I'd literally received it this morning. It was only a two-minute clip, but it shows the surrounding area of Medway. It illustrates how beautiful Medway is. A lot of people might not have that perception, but in and around the Hoo Peninsula, which you can just see in the background, there's great farming land. A lot of people go out there cycling. Medway's under a lot of reinvestment, and we're using that, all of those elements to kind of get behind us as a business. And we do an awful lot of work with Medway Council, which this piece was for. And again, it allows us to reach markets and have I suppose, a perception of scale that otherwise we wouldn't have, because they use us as brand ambassadors for Medway. So a little bit of background as to how did we decide that we were going to set up this distillery. Well, it's the industry that we love. It's quite a sexy industry, the drinks industry. Everybody thinks, oh, that's great, unless those that have worked with the likes of Diageo. Once you've done it, then you realise it's not quite as sexy as it might seem. It's quite glamorous. You've got chateaus, lovely wineries, distilleries all over the place. And it's a place that people go to enjoy themselves, and then ultimately the bars. But we needed to choose whether we went into beers, wines and spirits, because the drinks industry obviously is set up into those three. You've got the big players, the Stella Artois, the massive factory breweries to compete against, and you've got the craft breweries that are quite prevalent. Where are we going to sit? This picture here in the centre is actually an aerial shot of Gallo Winery, to give you some sort of idea of the scale that they operate at. They're the fermentation tanks creating the wine that they produce. And then this chap at the top is an Aussie, and he's got a fantastic business that sells Shiraz, all on allocation, all sold the year, 2 years before he's even made the wine. But he's very content. Obviously you've got Sipsmiths, and then I think this one at the bottom, I can't remember what Scottish distillery that one is. But breweries, low barrier entry, obviously little technical know-how. If there's a brewer here, they'll probably kill me, but it is pretty basic. And very favourable favourable tax rates, because as a craft brewer brewing below something like 500,000 litres, they get a lower tax, alcohol duty tax. Wineries, they're cheap, or they were when we were looking at it, because a lot of wineries were going out of business. It's very romantic, but a lot of wineries go out of business, and there's a lot of wineries, and how do you position yourself? Very difficult. Spirits, it's quite a quick turnaround to make spirit. When you've got the raw ingredients, you can make spirit within a matter of weeks. So from a scalability point of view, you can start producing at a low end. If you've got the right kit and the right space, you can then increase that production, which I'll talk about a little bit later, very, very quickly. There's high barriers to entry, a lot of tax, a lot of paperwork, a lot of customs involvement to get set up. So that's quite a nice thing, because not everybody can just rock up one day, open an account like you can here at Metro Bank. You can't all of a sudden rock up to customs and say, I want to do this. There's a long turnaround. Obviously a lot of competition. Wine, very price sensitive, low brand loyalty. And then within the larger spirits, a lot of sophisticated marketing. We go back to Diageo, although sometimes it's not always that sophisticated, but there's a lot of thought. So we decided to go into the spirits industry. That's cutting that a long story short. But when we look at the industry stats, and this is a presentation, I do apologise, as I say, I was kind of last minute stand-in for my brother. So this is a presentation that's a couple of years out of date, but this gives you some sort of idea as to where the volume is or was in 2014, these numbers were from. So you can see in global consumption of spirits, 17 billion litres. It's a big thing. Vodka, whiskey and gin. Vodka being the largest area by far. UK spirits market's all there for stats. And at that time, exports, and I'm going to talk about gin, but was only 450 million UK gin exports. Now in 2017, that's 530 million. So it's an 18% rise in exports alone in gin. And we knew that was happening, which is one of the reasons that we wanted to get in. But it's still quite small when you compare it to the total consumption of alcohol. And that excludes a product called Bijao. And if you've ever been to China and had some, it's very, very popular. But the quantity of Bijao consumed in China alone is about 15 billion litres. So not a big export market, though. It's all drank, obviously, locally, because it's good stuff. So, we're in this market with all these big brands on the left and more. This is just a sample. And a lot of craft distilleries popping up. So how do we establish a business, get ourselves recognised, and then grow? That was always the challenge. But coming back to positioning ourselves, how do we do that? How do we establish a brand, get it recognised, and get it so that it can grow for many years to come? So we started to look at a lot of other products on the market and really try and break it down and analyse it to see where we would sit in. This is a little slide which basically said, to me, Chase was obviously one of the first craft that was all about farm linked and producing your own product, but it had been done, that farm setting, tractors and Land Rovers and twee welly boots and stuff. They were very good at that, and they still are, so don't want to really cross with them. And then you've got the likes of Sipsmith's Inspirational, what they do and how they've done it, and Monkey 47, that's up there because that was inspirational, because it was the only 50 cl gin on the market when we started, but it was the most expensive gin on the market. I think it retails at around about 38 quid. I think a bottle, 37, 38, whereas most craft gins were around about that 30 to 32 pounds for a 70. So pound for pound, Monkey 47 were doing something right, and I thought, yeah, we need a piece of that. That would be nice. We decided to set ourselves out as a grain-to-glass distillery, meaning that we produce everything. Probably around about 98% of the craft gins that you'll come across are either made by that producer, where they buy in the alcohol from an industrial producer and then repurpose it in a still, or they don't actually make it themselves anyway. They subcontract that manufacture to somebody else. A grain to glass operation means that we bring in the grain, the sacks of it in the bottom right with Abby, our distiller, driving the fork truck. We process that, we go through a brewing process, which is why I say brewing's easy. That's the beginning, to make the base alcohol, fermentation, and then we do low wine distillation, and then we go on to high wine distillation, and then once we've got neutral alcohol at 96% pure ethanol, we can then start the process of creating gin or vodka. So it's a lot more involved as a process. But again, it's a barrier to entry because a lot of other people won't have that know-how, won't have the kit in order to do that, and it's something that we can talk about, that provenance element. So how do we brand that, and how do we get all those messages across in order that people can easily recognize us and easily understand what we're about, and then go forward? So again, this was a bit of a kind of a background to how we set out to position ourselves. This is a little bit of a pop quiz for any marketeers here, but these are 4 companies. So if anybody knows the answer, then that's great. If not, I'll skip straight on. Any great marketeers? The top left, you must know the top left. Yahoo, Mercedes-Benz and Starbucks. So what's in a name? Really, all of these companies don't say anything about what they do. But when we skip forwards to looking at the drinks industry is traditionally quite stale. It's all about where the place is. It's about that valley, or it's about that town, or whatever. So when we were thinking, well, should we be Medway Distillery or Kent Distillery? Well, not really, because it's done. There's loads of people out there. And actually, what does that mean when we want to go to Japan? The fact that we're Medway Distillery. It means a great lot to the people in Medway, but equally, if we want to try and sell it across the river in Essex, they'll go, yeah, but we don't like Medway. So it can be a barrier as much as it can be to a success. So we very much steered away from a location brand. That was a big fight that I had with my dad, because he's very proud of Medway. And then the other sort of traditional route is to name it after the family. So we had some branding with Russell's this and Russell's that. Again, another big fight. You can imagine Dad thinking legacy. Yeah, we'll have everything Russell's. But, again, it's done. And it's more egotistical than it is purposeful, I think. So we looked at other areas, and at the time there weren't many, but Sipsmiths obviously was quite a clever pun, which was why it was in the inspirational slide earlier on. And then Dry Fly Distilling, I think they're in America, but it was just nice. It's something that, in a trade environment or from a personal perspective, it's something that would stick in your mind and you remember, which means that you're going to be around. So Copper Rivet is the distillery. And this was the original rivet that we found when we took over the building and we started to put in the gas work, and the guy was super excited when he started digging, and then he found this big copper rivet. That's not why we called it Copper Rivet. But it is in there, for years to come when the tourists come round and they go, wow, there's the Copper Rivet, and there's a whole story there, but that's not actually why we called it Copper Rivet. We wanted something that sort of really matches our values, the craftsmanship that we were putting in. But something quite simple as well, and something that utilitarian and something that everybody can access, and we didn't want to be too snooty about it. It's something that we use throughout the process with the barrels. It's also something that if you ever visit the distillery, it's a Victorian pump house, and in the deli end, the whole ceiling is full of RSJs, and they're all riveted together. So it really links back to us. And in shipbuilding from Chatham, obviously rivets would have been a huge part of building the ships. So it's something, and obviously the copper bit kicks in because it links to distilling. It's not the fact that there was a copper rivet that we found. Although it is copper, you can see it's kind of gone greeny, which was fortunate. So having decided Copper Rivet Distillery, how do we sort of sell our brands? How do we let everybody know about what we're doing, and how do we compete? And here are some examples that we looked at in our research within across sector. So do we end up coming up with Copper Rivet Gin, Copper Rivet Vodka, Copper Rivet Whiskey, which is what Sipsmith do, which is what Anno do down the road, which is what most of the craft distilleries do, because it's easy, because you can then keep your marketing spend down, because you're just really talking about one message. And we decided that we wouldn't do that. We wanted to be best in class in vodka, best in class in whiskey, and best in class in gin. And they're each different categories. And from our perspective, the whiskey isn't coming out until next year. Well, they're not even going to be launched at the same time. So there is no point, we didn't think, of doing that. So we went through a whole process of really trying to define what gin was, what vodka was, what whiskey is, and then the bottom right is what's called White Dog or new make spirit. Looking at who consumes it, where they consume it, why they consume it, and then building the product imagery around those occasions. We looked at lots of different names. So obviously gin, vodka, whiskey, and the White Dog. And these were some of the names that we tabled, quite like Loose Cannon and Three Sheets. Slip, Siren, Oberon. But again, we always knew in the back of our head that we wanted to grow this business and we wanted it on a global scale. So right from the beginning, we invested a lot of money in protecting all the brands. So the brands that we move forwards with obviously needed to be registered here in the UK, across Europe. We wanted the US market, so we needed to get registrations in the US. Asia, China, Australasia, Japan, and of course we needed a brand that wasn't already registered in all those territories. So it was can I say ball ache? It was a real ball ache, because every time we thought we'd found one, we'd then get a lawyer to say, sorry, that's gone in that territory. You can have it in all the others, but you just won't be able to market your product in that one. So it was a combination of looking for the right fit that fitted our story. Everything needed to link back to everything needs to link back to the dockyard, because that's where we are, and it needed to talk about our quality SKUs, so that we could then sell happily into the future and everybody understand what we're about. And we landed with Dockyard Gin, which some of you may or may not be aware of, but that's probably the most sort of known product, because gin is of the moment. Unlike the previous slide where it said that vodka was 40%, I think, and gin was 20%, now it's 50-50. So gin has taken over. Well, it's about the same as vodka. So our vodka, Vela vodka, is a star constellation that the sailors would have used to navigate back in the day. Very proud of that one. Within 6 months in San Francisco International Spirits competition, it got a double gold award for the quality of spirit. That basically is 7 blind tasting judges. Everyone has to award it a gold for it to be double gold. And it's recognised as being the best competition globally. So that gives us leverage, again, to talk to the US about vodka, which vodka is still huge in the US. Masthouse Whiskey will be launched next year. And lastly, our irreverent spirit, Son of a Gun, which is White Dog. So this really was something in order to build a little bit of traction for us to open the doors in cocktail bars with mixologists, something quirky, something different that we could talk about in order to have those conversations. It's produced as a grain whiskey, but it's only matured for 2 months in the barrel, so it's clear. But it's got a lot of aromas like whiskey, but it's still quite sweet. A lot of vanilla from the barrel, and people just love the packaging. So it's sort of a door opener for us. When everybody's knocking on the door saying, "Hey, I've got a new gin," and all the bars are saying, "Thanks very much, I've got 200." It's a really difficult conversation. Whereas this one really opens the door. They don't obviously sell an awful lot of it because they don't really understand what it is, or it's difficult to sell on, but they love the product. It demonstrates the quality, and for us it's then a lead into the whiskey. So before we could really start talking about the whiskey and start people to taste the whiskey, people can sort of see how smooth the spirit is that we're producing that will become whiskey. So just to recap there, the 4 brands that we currently have. Going back to scaling the business, we set out to establish a drinks business, a drinks manufacturing company. We focused on spirits, and once we'd focused on spirits, with our knowledge of the drinks industry, if you recall way back in one of the slides, there's a lovely chateau. We decided that we couldn't be based on a farm, like Chase, but we needed a building that was going to impress. People would remember us about, people would have that experience of coming down to them, and that's where we decided on Pump House number 5. But straight away, in order to maximize everything that we do, in order to grow quicker than we would otherwise grow, we started to run tours. And that was a side business that we had to react to, that we were going to be making spirits, and now we've all of a sudden got a leisure business. I think last year we had 12,500 people on tours at the distillery, so we've got 3 tour guides and a whole front of house team that kind of looks after them and runs the bar, and that's kind of a side business that we weren't expecting when we established. We built all of the stills ourselves, so we didn't go to the normal fabricators to get them made. We designed them ourselves and we got them made locally in Chatham. It's a great thing that we can tell the journalists about. It's something that people get quite enthused about, and it's quite geeky. But the best thing about it is when the things break, the guys are just literally around the corner, and we can either fix it ourselves or the local business will come in and help us, although they don't break, but if we need to modify it, help us modify it. And it kept the cost down. So it was a lower cost option, get a lot more support. Those businesses in turn start to spread the news quicker because they're talking about this great distillery that they've been involved with, rather than some German manufacturers that have just shipped you the stuff and then you've installed it and then they've gone away. So at every point we worked locally with local farms to produce our grain, local engineering companies to make the kit, local mechanical engineering to put all the steam work in, and that really spread the word very, very quickly about who we were and what we were doing and how interesting it was. And of course they all want to bring their friends to say this is what we built because it looks lovely, and that all helps grow the business at zero cost. So we knew from the outset that we wanted to grow the business and make it a global business, not just a local business. And we wanted to lock in elements of marketing that would help identify the product in key markets, but also things that we would be able to then tweak with to identify that it's our product rather than it's a potential fake or it's a rip-off. So every bottle will basically carry these elements. The 3 coins, as we call them, are kind of our guarantees. The fact that it's from Kent, all the produce is from Kent, the grains. It's produced at the dockyard, and obviously everything has got pure provenance that we can trace back to the fields. So those 3 coins are about that sort of statement. The stopper obviously is our little seal of approval, and then we put the Union flag on, but it's not the Union flag that we all know today. For those that are keen on flags will notice that Northern Ireland unfortunately has been omitted It's not a political statement. The first Union flag was actually made in the dockyard in 1606 when the Scots and the Brits joined forces on naval vessels. So obviously they wouldn't want to sail under their own flags, so they joined them together. So we use that Union flag just again to recognise the dockyard. And if you ever want to come, then you're more than welcome. There's some information at the back. You can come down and enjoy the facilities. We've again, as I said, we've used the place in order to maximise visibility and maximise that experience, because I agree that experience is really key on promoting your business and getting people to talk about the business. So we welcome car clubs, and we run theme nights and all sorts of activity that goes on there to get different sectors to come in to what is our home and enjoy it. So then they can go away and enthuse, and hopefully they've enjoyed some of the product and enthuse about it. And obviously we're out and about. A lot of miles that the events team put in, farmers markets. We don't look for any return on that. It's just about, again, getting the message out locally. Lots of awards. Again, all about reaching different markets. And lastly, I think this is last, HMS Medway. So we're the first gin to ever have been used by the British Navy to name a ship, HMS Medway, which was commissioned just recently, but about 2 years ago up in Glasgow, the naming ceremony was there. So that's a little bit of background behind us. If you've got any questions on volumes or scalability, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But basically this was our sort of 3-year plan. As you can see, we're not masterminds in coming up with plans. We're much more visual, but it's a bit of a dad's army kind of approach to conquering the world, although the arrows don't come back. So very much, we want to sell to the world and we want to export, but we need to be true to our local friends. What we don't want to do is get to the point where we're trading with Japan, we're selling lots of product out there at great margins. The Japanese all come over on holiday and say, we want to go to this distillery because it's great. And they stay in a hotel and they say, I've never freaking heard of it. What's that about? That would be a disaster. When you go to France and you go to Bordeaux and you say, I want to go to Mouton Rothschild, they all know Mouton Rothschild. They've all got a bottle of it if you want to buy it. It's very expensive, but you can buy it at every bar, restaurant that you want to. And so our local market is key. That's where we're from. That's who we're about. And we want everybody to know us and enjoy us. We're what we like to call an affordable luxury. We're not the cheapest, but the pricing should be approachable and affordable to the local market. From the local market, we can then build out. We're doing great guns now in Sussex and Surrey, and we're starting to move north. We kind of skipped Essex actually. Norfolk's very interested. I don't know why that is, but we're sort of a pincer movement back onto Essex. I have nothing against Essex. My dad lived in Essex for a long time, but so we've sort of gone up to Norfolk and we'll be coming back. We're up to Birmingham, obviously in London. So we're sort of like a virus type approach, spreading town by town, postcode by postcode, in order to stay true. Grow the volume without disappointing any of our customers. Obviously, the last thing we want to do is take huge orders from one particular customer, get into a market, and then have difficulty servicing that market because it's too far away or the volumes are too quick for where we are. So we're growing that. And this was right at the outset, this was our plan. So we have exports going out to Singapore now, Australia, and China. So the right flank's been done. We need to work a little bit on Scandinavia. That's a target market for us. And we've just engaged in conversations with America for 2020. So 2020 is the primary year that we'll start to push exports. So that's where we are, I think. Yeah, and again, it was an adapted presentation, but I still stand by this. We did an awful lot of planning. We planned again, and we planned and planned, and then we've had to change the plan lots and lots of time. But we changed the plan on the basis, I think that was earlier in the presentation, you know, we want to be methodical. We want to be excellent at what we do. Sometimes we find something doesn't quite work. So, you know, we don't get disheartened. We just adapt what we're doing and we learn by that and we readjust our plan, reevaluate it. So the latest example is Singapore. One big retailer, it's a small place, but you know, a significant retailer in Singapore wants to buy direct from us rather than going through an importer distributor. But they don't have any way of buying the goods without the duty on it because there's, you know, customs rules. So we've had to set someone to one side to then relearn all the customs regulations on duty drawbacks, technicality over what we do on duty stamps, how we destroy all of those so that we can basically sell this guy, you know, thousands of pounds worth of spirit in the way that he wants to buy it, because that's how he's going to buy it. And if we don't do it, we're not going to service him. So yeah, we need to just tweak our process in order to allow that to happen. So I think that we can call that an end, if you're happy to. Thank you very much.